Are we doing this already? For real? Seriously, the paint's not even dry in the other thing, and we're gonna pretend they'll really... Fine.
Comics are weird!
Okay, so remember how the new Spider-Man movies are technically being made by Sony, even though they're part of and more or less being overseen by the whole Marvel Cinematic Universe thing at Disney that supposedly makes everything more complicated because you've got the interest of a successful studio that's operating at how do we take over the world, but in a nice way levels bumping up against those of a not really that successful studio that's operating more in the zone of we'll make a movie out of Morbius if it'll keep the lights on for another month? Well, that seemed to happen again with the marketing of Spider-Man Far From Home, which initially opted to get around the problem of how do we market a Spider-Man movie set after Infinity War and Endgame without giving away what happened with Spider-Man at the conclusion of those two movies, considering he appeared to die in Infinity War by just not giving a shit and showing him and a bunch of other people still being alive in the world looking more or less intact, so hey, I guess that whole Thanos thing is gonna work itself out okay, so much for the suspense. Hey, sorry Mickey, some of us don't have Simba, Aladdin, Woody, Elsa, and Star Wars to also land on this year. This is literally all we've got. But okay, Peter Parker's alive, he's doing the European vacation thing with his more interesting school friends, and there's big monsters to fight, apparently, cool, and the bad guy is Jake Gyllenhaal as classic Spider-Man Silver Age nemesis Quentin Beck, aka Mysterio, aka the one with the head. Also, apparently Spider-Man gets a nifty black stealth suit for some reason that'll make him kind of look like Spider-Man Noir, which now, thanks to the Into the Spider-Verse, is a reference a lot more people are going to get. Though, unfortunately for this movie, that means they'll have also seen Into the Spider-Verse, which was a goddamn masterpiece, probably the best mainstream Hollywood movie that came out last year, maybe the best Spider-Man movie ever made, certainly since the first two, and can't help but make any return to a normal Spider-Man film feel bland by comparison, even if you're well sold on the MCU incarnation of the character, which I'm really not all that much, no disrespect to Tom Holland, he's fine, but I know a lot of people are. Oh, and speaking of Into the Spider-Verse, cue trailer 2 now that Endgame is out and they're allowed to spoil things.
We could have used someone like you on my world.
Your world? Beck is from Earth, just not ours. The snap tore a hole in our dimension.
You're saying there's a multiverse?
Multiverse, eh? Alright, so this plus watching Game of Thrones reenact the Daffy Duck talent agent sketch that ends with suicide by dynamite for a punchline is giving me a sense that we're about to hit the nadir of screenwriters and marketing teams being too involved with both one another and writing to outwit plot guessers on social media rather than tell a good story, because putting this information into the trailer, let alone the actual story, feels like it's only there to fuel the self-sustaining free marketing machine by generating free coverage in the form of shows like this, the one you're watching right now, by invoking recent memories of Into the Spider-Verse and the omnipresent issue of those big Fox reboots everyone assumes are coming, thus getting everyone talking about things like, so will there be a Spider-Verse crossover now? Is this how they'll retcon the Netflix shows and Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. into a pocket universe? Will the X-Men, or maybe just the 3 actors anyone still cares about, pop out of one of those multiverse portals in an end credit sequence? While fans with even cursory familiarity with the material are presumably expected to just hold back and not blurt out, Mysterio fakes things? Like, that's literally his entire gimmick. He's a disgraced Hollywood special effects guy. He uses tricks and illusions and sometimes robots and masks or like holograms or whatever to make it look like he's doing magic stuff to fool people so he can do crimes. Now granted, the business going on with these big elemental monster guys, who I guess are being designated as the reimagined Sony Marvel versions of Sandman, Hydro Man, and Molten Man, which I'm not a big fan of since those are pretty compelling characters in their own right and this feels like a sloppy way to just toss them off as generic one-off monsters. But whatever. Would probably be hard to sell as just a regular guy doing tricks to an audience now, so this version of Mysterio probably does have some kind of powers from like stolen alien technology like in the first movie, or maybe he's a magic user and Doctor Strange is going to show up, but something else is still probably going on other than a multiverse. Or maybe it's not. I wouldn't put it past the Marvel producers to decide they need a multiverse concept sitting on deck just to be used when they need it, though seeding it into the storyline of a series they only half control that's meant to be tying off the bow on the last phase rather than starting anything new would be a curious choice. It's possible I'm completely and totally wrong about this one, and for a change I'd like to be, especially considering some people's more out there guesses about what could be going on. Like, I'd be thrilled if this meant Tom Holland's Spider-Man would be showing up in Spider-Verse 2, and thus make that whole thing canon to the MCU, or for the live-action versions of Miles or Spider-Gwen, or the best Doc Ock ever to show up there. I will in fact applaud in the theater if it turns out that really is Nicolas Cage in the black suit, or Tobey Maguire, or Donald Glover, or Andrew Garfield. Okay, maybe not Andrew Garfield. As for whether or not this is going to be what explains where the X-Men come from suddenly, everyone is expected to have a theory for this, and I get it, but this is like Marvel movie number 24, and I feel like hardcore fans still aren't absorbing that that's not how it's worked so far. The approach has still largely been, no one actually cares that much about retroactive inconsistency, so these movies don't have to either. Like, people have been asking for 8 years since the original Avengers, if there were already all these other super people, why weren't they doing anything to help? And then Endgame's answer is, they were, you just didn't see it. See, the Ancient One was helping out right over there, now shut up and watch the movie. Now, I largely expect, and honestly would prefer, that when the X-Men do show up, it's going to be more like, oh yeah, mutants? Yeah, that's totally been a thing we've all been talking about a lot during the 80 to 90% of our lives that haven't been depicted on screen screen in these movies yet, okay? And if they are going to do some kind of reality reshaping event, not that I think it's a great idea, but I would bet more on it having to do with the series thus far not having much for Scarlet Witch to do beyond absorbing emotional trauma because, well, precedent, but that's a story for another time. Either way, I'm sure we'll find out in July when Spider-Man Far From Home hits screens and they reveal what's actually been going on. Until then, I'm Bob, and that's the big picture.